Here with our voices, welcome back. We're joined by VOA Director Amanda Bennett to discuss the Free Press. She is a Pulitzer Prize-winning investigative journalist who sits on the board of the Committee to Protect Journalists. CPJ is an independent organization that works to protect and defend reporters across the continent and around the world. Welcome, Amanda.
Thank you so much. Thank you, all of you.
We're
delighted to have you.
Yeah, I'm happy to be here.
We're very delighted to have you here. And with battles over truth sometimes seeming to break out globally, I think most people would agree that a free press following the tried and true principles of journalism is important. But where does the Voice of America fit in this landscape?
I think we fit in the absolute dead center of that because that's what our mission is. Our mission is to provide objective, fact-based news and information to countries and places that don't have any other way to get it. So I feel like that we are part of the solution to this problem because what we're doing is broadcasting truth.
We take pride as the U.S. global media to export democratic values and for instance, the First Amendment law, freedom of expression. To what extent should we promote these values and still be mindful and respectful of countries' sovereignty, cultural values, and rights?
So that's really key. So what we're trying to do is broadcast accurate, truthful information. We're not trying to say change your religion, change your government, overthrow a government, don't overthrow a government. We're not engaging in any of those things. We're trying to tell the people in those countries what is actually happening and to tell them what's happening from this point of view and from this point of view, often giving them, access to ways of looking at things that they don't have otherwise. So we're not trying to get into anybody's sovereignty. We're trying to broadcast accurate information.
Right. My question is on WikiLeaks' Julian Assange, who is known for leaking sensitive information globally. So what does his arrest mean for press freedom?
That's a really complicated question that has a lot to do with standards and laws and classified information. I think one thing all journalists around the world are looking at is what's going to happen to him and how will that affect press freedom, because even those who are kind of concerned about the actions he took would also be concerned about prosecution. And so I think it's a very delicate question for all of us.
Amanda, trust in the press has declined in recent years, and this is something that we as journalists are very aware of. Why do you think that is, and what can journalists do to regain that confidence in the public?
Well, I think we're all talking a lot about the kinds of, inaccurate and kind of sensational news that's being thrown around the globe, sometimes coming from real news organizations, sometimes coming from news organizations that aren't really news organizations at all. I think that serves to undermine the feeling of trust. Now, when I said VOA is at the center of this argument, our trust is actually staying the same or getting higher on average around the world, and that is including broadcasting into countries like Russia and China and Iran, places where we're actually banned from being. I think that's because we insist on reporting facts.
In terms of access, you mentioned now the challenge, because everybody has mobile phones and internet access, anybody could become a journalist. And so now the challenge is shifted to disinformation, or what some say fake news. Is that a challenge or an opportunity for VOA?
I clearly see it as an opportunity because I think that we can see this among our own audience, that people during times of crisis, during times of stress, like the slow motion coup attempt in Zimbabwe, you can see people coming to us. They're coming to us because we're a trusted brand name that they can rely on. So I see that the people's distrust and fear about media and information actually draws people towards organizations they can trust.
Speaking of trusted names, VOA has been a very trusted name in Burundi. I've covered the country for about 15 years, but unfortunately, currently, we are banned in the country. We're not allowed to receive any reports. How do we circumvent that situation and still trying to reach to the people that have been really trusting to us in the past 20 years or more?
It's a great tragedy. I mean, you're absolutely right. We're incredibly important to Burundi. Burundi's audience is really important to us. So the fact that we've been banned from being there, that our reporters are banned from reporting there, that's a huge tragedy for the continent. It's not the first time VOA has been faced with this around the world. And what we try and do is we try and find alternate ways of reaching people, either by broadcasting from outside the country or by using digital means more often. So we try and find, when we get thrown out of a country, we don't just say, okay, you know, we're done. We try and find other ways of reaching the population and of reaching out to the government and saying, this is not good for you or your people. So we're not giving up on Burundi. We're trying to find ways of improving the situation. That's great.
You know, the Chinese have an enormous presence in the African media, and you have had a chance to work with the Chinese in the past. Given their history, what do you think about their presence on the continent?
So I think the presence on the continent is, you know, something that the African countries themselves are going to need to have to judge. This is one of the things where I said, we don't say do this or do that. We're not saying accept China in or don't accept China in. But when it comes to the press, I mean, I've had a long experience in looking at the press, and it's wonderfully interesting to take precise views of Chinese view of the media. For example, you can put our live broadcast, for example, of Vice President Pence's speech, up against the transcript that China released to its people, and there's a total difference between the two things. They didn't make up anything, but they took a whole bunch of stuff out. So when you start thinking about being communicated to by China, you have to remember they're giving you the communication that they want you to hear, while we're giving you everything.
You know, you oversee hundreds of journalists at the Voice of America. Some of us are here at HQ, but many of us are around the world. Some of us do come from countries where reporting critically about the government can get us in jail. I'm just wondering, how do you manage that? I mean, I can imagine going to sleep some nights is hard for you.
It's probably the hardest thing for anybody who's running a global news gathering force. And the first thing I want to say is, I am so grateful for the work of some of these brave people, because they're really the ones. It's not us here who are doing the hard work, it's them. And whenever we have any kind of issue like this, our first thing is to say to them, the number one concern is not the story. The number one concern is your safety. So we need to take whatever precautions we can to ensure your safety. We need to be able to be prepared to remove you from a dangerous situation. You mentioned the Committee to Protect Journalists. One of the things that the Committee to Protect Journalists does is to help not just protect journalists while they're working, but to try and get them out of trouble when they get into it. So that's something we all have to pay attention to, because of the great debt we all owe to them for the hard work that they're doing.
And you've been on the ground. You've been in Nigeria. You've been in Central African Republic. You have spoken to reporters on the ground. What do they tell you?
Well, I mean, they talk to me about the difficulties that they have. Some of them, for example, in Uganda, I spoke to a group of journalists, all of whom had been physically harassed in some way. And so they talked about what that meant. And they talked about the difficulties in, you know, getting to the people they want to talk to. So one of the big barriers to free press in some of these countries is that the officials that you want to talk to don't have the same sense of obligation that officials here do to communicate with their people. They have very hard jobs. And so when I've talked to journalists in these different countries, I've been very well aware of what they're facing.
And also, Amanda, this show, Our Voices, is crafted to empower women. Why is it so important to give women a voice?
Well, I mean, let's just think about it for a moment. It's 50% of the population of the globe. And if you disenfranchise 50% of the globe's population, you're losing 50% of the values. Not even to speak of women's own human rights to pursue a career, to work on things, to be listened to be respected. I mean, all those things are really important. And I'm thrilled by this show. I believe that speaking to African women, from African women, will help serve to show them what's possible.
What's been the hardest day for you as the VOA director?
I think that, you know, there was a day within the last 18 months when we learned that one of our journalists in Somalia had been killed in a car blast, and realizing what we talked about before, that this was not a joke, this was reality, that people there were facing really, really serious things. And so knowing that somebody that was part of our organization had lost his life because of that really, really was a very difficult moment, I think, for all of us.
Yeah. It was. For the Africa division, it was really hard for us as well.
Yeah.
I think that's pretty much it. If there's anything you'd like to add about what press freedom means for our audience and for where we stand at VOA, maybe last word.
Well, I think It's absolutely true. There is nothing, I think, in the world that's more powerful than a free press in letting people know what's going on. Why do dictators and despots want to close down the press? That's because information is power, and they want to keep the power and keep the people from having the power. And what we're trying to do is bring the power back to the people by letting them see and understand what's really going on. I think a free press is absolutely critical.
I just loved in your op-ed in November when you wrote that our audience sees a country strong enough to criticize itself. I thought that was key.
Isn't that amazing? I mean, if you're a strong country, a strong person, you can take criticism and learn from it.
Absolutely. Yeah. Well, that's why we're here.
Yeah.
Thank you. Press freedoms
and thank you for your work, all of you. Thank you.
Thank you.